Historians of Reddit, what's a devastating event that no one talks about? Part 3. The Lebanese Civil War. It is pretty unknown to anyone who doesn't actively study the Middle East. At the time, Lebanon was considered one of the best countries on earth and was a top tourist destination. When the war started in 1975, it all came crashing down. Upwards of 100,000 were killed and millions left the country. So many left that today, there are more Lebanese living outside of the country than inside. Depending on what religion you were or which neighborhood you were from, you could be kidnapped and/or killed on the spot if you were stopped. My dad, who immigrated because of the war, actually used to make the joke that a Christian militia would stop someone they thought was Palestinian and show them a tomato and ask them to say what it was. Since they pronounce it slightly differently than Lebanese, they would be shot for saying it the wrong way. Another story is that he saw a jeep dragging a body with barbed wire around the neck through the streets and they stopped at the church across the street from his house, left their guns in the car, because you don't bring them into the house of God, attended the mass, and went back out killing. Roving checkpoints, snipers, and militias on the streets ensured traveling anywhere was unsafe. They actually used to announce on the radio which roads were safe to take and which weren't, and started showing TV programs during the day instead of evening, so people wouldn't go out to fight. Since then, the country hasn't had 24/7 electricity and water in many parts. With a corrupt government and hyper-inflated currency, the situation is very bleak. They export more highly educated per capita than any other country. Just 2 years ago, the Lebanese lira was stable at 1,500 LL to the dollar. Today, it is more than 10,000 LL to the dollar. The Bath School Disaster. Bath, Michigan. Andrew Kehoe, the 55-year-old school board treasurer, was angered by increased taxes and his defeat in the April 5, 1926, election for township clerk. Kehoe had a reputation for difficulty on the school board and in personal dealings. In addition, he was notified in June 1926 that his mortgage was going to be foreclosed upon. For much of the next year until May 1927, Kehoe purchased explosives. He secretly hid them on his property and under the school. On May 18, 1927, Kehoe then set off almost simultaneous explosions at his farmstead and at the Bath Consolidated School. His devices destroyed the farm's buildings and ripped through the north wing of the Bath Consolidated School building. As rescuers began working at the school, Kehoe drove up to the schoolyard and detonated dynamite inside his shrapnel-filled truck. The truck explosion killed Kehoe plus 4 other people and also injured bystanders. During the rescue and recovery efforts, searchers discovered an additional 500 pounds. About 230 kilograms of unexploded dynamite and pyrotol in the south wing of the school that had been set to go off at the same time as the initial explosions in the north wing. Kehoe had apparently intended to destroy the entire school and kill everyone in it. The destruction of Jerusalem, 70 AD. For generations the Jews have resisted the hand of the Romans. Once again, they are in active rebellion. The Romans send in their legions with the challenge of conquering the legendary citadel. Jerusalem. Once conquered by King David, Jerusalem became one of the mightiest cities in the world. Pilgrims travel miles for the Passover feast every year. And the city's crowning jewel, the temple. At the time, it was one of the biggest buildings in the empire, filled with incense, sacrifices, gold, silver, and jewels beyond count. The city had 10 years' worth of food and water stored. To siege it would be to lose. Yet the Romans sieged it. Eventually, against all predictions at the time, the walls fall. It is a massacre. Soldiers could not be controlled as they were released into the streets, cutting down anyone who stood in their path. Buildings are burned, blood cast about on the stones like rain from the sky. Eventually they work their way to the temple. Their orders are to take it intact, but after the devastation caused by the siege, the temple is ransacked, stripped of most of its decorations, then set ablaze. To see that building, to feel what the Jews felt when the house of God was destroyed before them, I wish we could know the fear. For if God's house is not safe, what is? After the blaze recedes to ash, soldiers bring pickaxes to the rubble of the once mighty temple and break the stones in the ground to reach the fold that had melted into the cracks in the floor. At the end of it, nothing remained. This battle left around 1 million Jews and Romans dead. It is a shame it isn't talked about much outside religious circles. The entire history of the Jewish people is really something worth learning about. The Circassian Genocide. Most of the Circassian population killed and driven out of their lands by Russia after the Russo-Circassian War, which ended in 1864. Circassia was located in today's southern Russia, and Sochi is considered their traditional capital. Russian and Cossack soldiers used various brutal methods to entertain themselves, such as tearing the bellies of pregnant women and removing the baby inside, then feeding the babies to dogs. Georgia is the only country in the world to officially recognize it as of 2021. The Moriori Genocide. While a fairly small event by world standards, it's a tragic microcosm of human cruelty. The Moriori were an offshoot of Maori culture, the indigenous people of New Zealand. They settled the Chatham Islands, small islands off the main New Zealand islands, from around 1500. Over the centuries, while maintaining trade ties with the Maori, the Moriori developed their own language and a largely pacifist culture. In the early 1800s, in the midst of wars between the Maori and the English invaders, some tribes of Maori equipped themselves with muskets. Around November 1835, Maoris invaded the Chatham Islands, easily overwhelming the pacifist Moriori. The resulting genocide left 95% of the Moriori dead, considered one of the worst genocides in human history. Acknowledgement and reparations for the Moriori have been a long time coming. The Chatham Islands remain largely uninhabited to this day. Note that I'm not in any way trying to pin this on the Maori, who were themselves being similarly attacked by the British at the same time. I found out about this recently, and I don't think many people know about this. The Bhopal gas tragedy in India in 1984. It's India's worst gas industrial tragedy, killing 2,500 people, wiping out the town the plant was in, and 500,000 people were exposed. It's also the world's most traumatic chemical accident in history. Union Carbide, the pesticide company, has a chemical plant in India where they made methyl isocyanate, MIC. As far as we're aware. The exact cause of the accident is unknown. The Indian government says it was from poor management and non-existent maintenance. Union Carbide says it was sabotage. The MIC safety systems were malfunctioning, and lines and valves were in poor condition. Also, vent gas scrubbers and the steam boiler used to clean the pipes were also out of service. During the late evening hours on December 2, 1984, water entered a side pipe and into a tank that contained 42 tons of MIC that had been there since late October. The water led to an exothermic reaction, which was accelerated by contaminants, high ambient temps, and other factors, like the presence of iron from the corroding steel pipelines. The pressure in the tank went from 2 psi at 10:30 p.m. to 10 psi at 11:30 p.m. Two senior refinery employees assumed the reading was a malfunction of the instrument. By 11:30 p.m., workers in the MIC area were experiencing some symptoms of MIC exposure and started to look for leaks. One was found by 11:45 and reported to the MIC supervisor on duty. The decision from the MIC supervisor was to examine the leak after a tea break at 12:15 a.m. In the meantime, the employees were instructed to look for more leaks. In the 5 minutes after the tea break, which ended at 12:40 a.m., the reaction in the tank reached a critical state at an alarming speed. Tank temps were off the scale, maxed out beyond 25 C, and the pressure in the tank was 40 psi. One employee witnessed a concrete slab above the tank crack as the emergency release valve burst, and the pressure in the tank rose to 55 psi despite the fact that atmospheric venting of toxic MIC gas had already begun. The atmospheric venting should have been prevented, but the prevention measures in place were rendered inoperable. 30 tons of MIC escaped from the tank into the atmosphere in 45 to 60 minutes. This increased to 40 tons in 2 hours. The gases were blown southeast into Bhopal. The siren was set off by an employee at 12:50 a.m. when the concentration of the gas in and around the plant became too much to tolerate. Activation of the system usually triggered 2 alarms, one on the inside of the plant and one on the outside, alerting the public and the city of Bhopal. However, the 2 sirens had been decoupled in 1982 so that it was possible to leave the factory warning alarm on while turning off the public one. So, the public one was sounded at 12:50 and then quickly turned off, since company procedure meant to avoid alarming the public over tiny leaks. Workers evacuated, traveling upwind. Since MIC gas is twice as dense as air, in an open environment, the gas will fall to the ground. As people were sleeping, the gas spread throughout Bhopal and the towns nearby. All the while, the UCC plant continued to spill MIC gas. By daybreak, thousands of people had died, with the cause of death being choking, reflexogenic circulatory collapse, and pulmonary edema. Autopsies revealed changes to the lungs, cerebral edema, tubular necrosis in the kidneys, fatty degeneration of the liver, and necrotizing enteritis. The stillbirth rate rose 300% and the neonatal mortality rate rose 200%. Lacking any safe alternative on December 16, 1984, the tanks that leaked were emptied of any remaining MIC by reactivating the plant and continuing the manufacture of pesticide. Despite safety precautions, like water-carrying helicopters circling the plant, this led to a second mass evacuation from Bhopal. 200,000 children were exposed to the gases, and the effects of this are still going on through the present day, and will likely see the effects generations down the road. The Kashmir Genocide, or the Exodus in Kashmir. It started since 1989, and almost 600,000 people were affected because of this. Back then there were a lot of anti-programs by Muslims against everyone else. The most horrifying was the three options. According to it, the other religion people, mostly Hindustan, had only three options. They had to convert to Islam, die, or leave Kashmir, but if they leave they have to leave behind their mothers, sisters, daughters and wives for them to enjoy. This was openly given in the newspapers. You can still find the clippings and news videos in Google where they were openly stating these options. Thousands and thousands of women, including children, were brutally raped during that period. They wouldn't even kill them, they'd tie them up in front of their husbands or fathers or brothers or sons and rape them. Later the men would be tortured physically as a mode of entertainment for years at a stretch. One of the reasons the terrorist Muslims from you-know-where are always unhappy with India is because we won't let them do all this anymore. India has lost a lot to the Muls after their invasion. It just can't be possible to describe their atrocities in words. Historians of India say that the Britishers were a bit better than the Muslim or Mul invasion in India. US President Franklin Roosevelt prevented Anne Frank's family from entering US soil and thus banished most of them to death. You know who Anne Frank is? A young Jewish girl living in Amsterdam during World War II, she was forced to hide with her family and another family in the attic of a building where her father worked for 2 years while Nazis searched for Jews. She wrote a detailed diary during her time of confinement, and that's why we know about her. She was also put on the last train from her neighborhood to the Auschwitz concentration camp and was later moved to Bergen-Belsen, where she died at the age of 15. FDR had publicly stated that immigrant Jews and Germans could be spesen, and also placed US citizens of Japanese descent into internment camps coerced by Nazi-dominated nations. But Anne's father, Otto, was a well-connected man. He had relationships with members of the Roosevelt White House, including FDR's wife, Eleanor. Despite Otto Frank's skill at navigating paperwork and charming the right people, the president's anti-immigrant policy grew stricter. Despite having ties to the Roosevelt family, Otto Frank was unable to convince American acquaintances that more Jewish refugees should be allowed into the country. He was the only member of the Frank family who survived the Holocaust and took part in editing his daughter's diary, which originally included sexual thoughts about other girls and descriptions of menstruation before it was published. It's been pointed out by numerous contemporary historians that Donald Trump's foreign policies, including referring to South Americans as rapists and attributing COVID-19 to Chinese people by calling it the China virus or Kung flu, that he replicated Roosevelt's attempts to publicly demonize harmless groups that sometimes need America's help desperately. Trump would have let Anne Frank be gassed and cremated because she was a Jew. Winecoff Hotel Fire in 1946. Deadliest hotel fire in US history and killed 119 hotel occupants, including the hotel's original owners. The Winecoff Hotel was built by William F. Winecoff and completed in 1913. The structure was of brick ordinary joist construction. The floors were numbered 1 to 16, excluding the numbering of a 13th floor. And it is said that the number 13 was never posted anyplace within the building. In its center core were 2 enclosed elevators and an open T-shaped stairway. Built utilizing the 1911 building codes and classified as fireproof at that time, the steel frame was protected and the roof and floors were concrete with protected steel beams and girders. Although there was considerable attention given to making the building's structural members fire resistive, there was no automatic sprinkler system, no fire doors, and no exterior fire escapes. However, the building did meet the existing codes and was widely advertised as a fireproof hotel. It is believed that some 280 guests occupied the Winecoff Hotel on Friday evening, December 6, including a large number of teenagers from across the state of Georgia. In town to attend the annual youth assembly at the Georgia state capitol, which was being sponsored by the YMCA. Upon the fire department's arrival at the Winecoff, having arrived there within 2 minutes of receiving the alarm, the firefighters discovered dense smoke and flames emitting from the 3rd, 4th and 5th floors. The compound, the site, the horrifying sound of voices of trapped occupants could be heard echoing from the thick smoke. The fire chief ordered the ladders run up, but they were unable to reach the upper floors. The firefighters also attacked the blaze from the inside, but were unable to make much headway. Much to the horror of the firefighters, bodies began to appear through the thick smoke from above and violently plummeted to the sidewalk. As the aerial ladders were being raised to rescue the trapped occupants, floodlights were activated and directed upon the building, which revealed the panic-stricken faces of the people who were desperately pleading and waving for help while hanging from the windows of their rooms. On the back side of the building, thick smoke filled the 10-foot wide alley between the Winecoff Hotel and the 12-story mortgage guarantee building on Ellis Street. Here, the scene was not unlike the one on Peachtree Street. At the front of the building, with the exception that there was no space in which to maneuver an aerial ladder. Here, firefighters could not see the victims hanging from their windows because of the smoke, however, they could hear them desperately calling for help. The fire continued to intensify within the building as the dark thick smoke began to push from the windows with an ever-increasing velocity. Along with the upsurge in the momentum of the smoke, bursts of orange flames began to appear within the smoke coming from the windows, followed by a flashover, which occurred with a mighty blast. Multiple floors burst into flames all at once, and the orange glow illuminated the surrounding buildings with an ominous amber glow. In all, 119 people had been killed and over 100 others injured. Among this number was 30 teenagers in town for the youth assembly and William and Grace Winecoff, who died in their 16th-floor penthouse. 32 engines, 5 aerial ladders, 6 city service ladder trucks, and other support vehicles totaling 49 pieces of fire service apparatus responded to the Winecoff Hotel fire. The cause of this tragic event remains a mystery even today. The Tenerife airport disaster. A KLM Boeing 747 carrying 248 people was landing at the Tenerife airport in the Canary Islands on March 27, 1977. At the same time, a Pan Am 747 was carrying 396 departing for JFK. There was fog over the island when the accident occurred, and there was no ground radar system. The Pan Am had to taxi on the runway after a terrorist attack at Gran Canaria Airport had diverted flights to Tenerife. The KLM was starting to land on the same runway as the Pan Am was on. The air traffic control tower couldn't see the planes due to the heavy fog. The Pan Am 747 saw the landing lights of the KLM and tried to speed up in order to get out of the way. The KLM had tried to pull up but couldn't avoid hitting the plane. All passengers on the KLM plane were killed on impact or from the resulting fire. The Pan Am was hit with 335 being killed in the collision and the fire afterwards. 61 people in the front of the Pan Am survived with injuries. 583 people were killed in the accident, making it the most deadliest airplane accident ever. The Army public school massacre that happened in Pakistan on 2014, I still remember coming back from school seeing my family members crying while watching the news. Even though I was only around 11, I still remember that day vividly. On 16 December 2014, 6 gunmen affiliated with the Tehrik-i-Taliban (TTP) conducted a terrorist attack on the Army public school in the northwestern Pakistani city of Peshawar. The militants, all of whom were foreign nationals, comprising 1 Chechen, 3 Arabs and 2 Afghans, entered the school and opened fire on school staff and children, killing 149 people, including 132 schoolchildren ranging between 8 and 18 years of age, making it the world's 4th deadliest school massacre. A rescue operation was launched by the Pakistan Army Special Services Group (SSG) Special Forces, who killed all 6 terrorists and rescued 960 people. Students were forced to watch their teachers and principal get killed in front of them. I still remember a survivor telling how he faked his death by laying on the dead bodies covered in blood for hours. The terrorist kept shooting the dead to make sure they died. There are documentaries about the survivors, and to be honest, it's worth watching. The expulsion of the Acadians, also known as the Great Upheaval, the Great Expulsion, and the Great Deportation, was the forced removal by the British of the Acadian people from the present-day Canadian maritime provinces of Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island and northern Maine. Parts of an area historically known as Acadia, causing the death of thousands of people. The expulsion, 1755-1764, occurred during the French and Indian War, the North American theater of the 7 Years' War, and was part of the British military campaign against New France. The British first deported Acadians to the 13 colonies and, after 1758, transported additional Acadians to Britain and France. In all, of the 14,100 Acadians in the region, approximately 11,500 Acadians were deported. A census of 1764 indicates that 2,600 Acadians remained in the colony, having eluded capture. I never see this talked about unless others like British history, but the Princes in the Tower. It's such a sad story and breaks my heart. King Edward V and his brother, Richard Duke of Shrewsbury. They were about 12 and 9/10 respectively. No one knows what exactly happened to them or who killed them. It's one of the biggest conspiracies in the world. I'm one of the many people that 100% believe their uncle, who went on to become Richard III, had them killed so he could take the throne. He kept them locked in the Tower of London in 1483. After their father Edward IV died, they lived in what is now called the Bloody Tower. Apparently they had free reign of the grounds and played together and were well taken care of up until the night they were murdered. Many believe they were suffocated. Their bodies were shoved in a small chest and buried under the main staircase when you entered the tower. When they were found, they had multiple broken bones, and no one is sure if they were caused if they put up a fight against their attackers, or if the bones were broken when they were being shoved in the chest. When they were exhumed, they said the bones belonged to a small child and a preteen boy. The royal family has still not given permission for DNA tests to be taken from their bones to confirm or deny that they are those of the boys. They are buried in Westminster Abbey, in one of the small rooms of the Lady Chapel. They are in a black chest on a ledge in the wall, facing the tomb of their relatives' nieces, Queen Elizabeth I and Queen Mary I. Better known as Bloody Mary. Everyone who knows this story is about 99% positive the bones belong to the boys, but it would be nice to have DNA evidence, so maybe they could get a different kind of burial. It breaks my heart because their father just died. The eldest brother, Edward V, was supposed to be king, but was never crowned and thrown into the Tower of London. His younger brother, Richard of Shrewsbury, was in asylum at Westminster Abbey, ironically, with his mother, Elizabeth Woodville, and other siblings. It is said, and written, by Thomas More, that when Richard III's guards came to Abbey, they threatened Elizabeth Woodville to give them Richard, or they would kill all of her children. She reluctantly gave them Richard, and Thomas More said you could hear her screams and cries as she watched her little boy being taken. It's just so heartbreaking that she couldn't protect her sons, and the boys didn't have anyone else to protect them or give them some sort of comfort in their last months. Thanks for watching. If you like the video, please drop a like, and to stay up to date with my latest videos, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the button under this video.